So the United Nations recently came out with its State of the World Population 2019 report. It's a significant report because of the data that it presents as well as the projections that they've made. It's going to have a lasting impact on everybody involved in every country, so it's very important. Now, the United Nations, it has no money of its own. Basically, it's dependent upon member state governments, the international organizations, the corporate houses to fund them to go ahead and do anything, basically, from United Nations peacekeeping missions to eradicating malaria or Ebola. Whatever they do, they are dependent upon others for the money. So it's not really much that they can do. It's been rightly called a redundant organization because nothing really gets done there. People just come, score political points, and just go back. And you have all these people working at the United Nations taking an astronomical amount of money as their salaries, and nothing really gets done there.
Population growth will not occur evenly around the world. In fact, it will be concentrated in certain regions. It is anticipated that over half of global population growth between now and 2050 will take place in that region. At the other extreme, it is expected that the population of Europe will, in fact, decline somewhat in the coming decades.
So we will touch upon the data presented in the report as well as the projections that they have made and the solutions that they have called for in the report, which is very surprising actually for United Nations to implicitly or explicitly basically say that certain regions are going to experience a population explosion and certain regions of the world are going to experience a decline in their populations. So the solution is to have immigration from the overpopulated countries into the countries where the population is low in order to balance this equation, which fits the narrative of the neoliberal neocons because they love immigration. The rich corporates, the rich people, the governments across the world, they love immigration. Now, why do they love immigration? The basic answer is that number one cost for any businesses is to pay their workers. You know, the salary they have to pay for their workers, the incentives that they have to give to them, the conditions that they have to provide for their workers to work properly. A lot of them are covered under labor laws in every country. But what happens is with more immigration, they have a larger number of people that are applying for the limited number of jobs. So that will push the wages down for the workers as there will be people coming from other countries into a country where they're willing to work for half the wages or even less for double the amount of hours that a normal citizen of that country is supposed to work under the laws, and the citizen is entitled to get paid for the number of hours that he works, and he's supposed to be paid for the overtime that he puts in. But in case of immigrants, when they're coming in until they become citizens, those labor laws don't really apply to them to the extent that it would for an automatically it would for a citizen. So these corporates, they love it. The rich people, they love it. It helps push their costs down, and they can make more profit and ship that profit off to tax havens, and then basically play God all across the globe in any country that they go to. You know, you have examples. Just look at Amazon, Facebook, Google, and other rich enterprises. Not just these people. How they are basically going across anywhere in the world that they want to go. They're buying properties in any country that they want to have yachts and all those things. It's pretty evident. And the governments also love immigration because it reduces the need for the government to invest in its own people. The government does not have to spend more on educating their own people, on the improving the healthcare for their own people, because the immigrants coming in, they have to be skilled on their own. I mean, it's not the job for the host government to skill them or provide them with amenities. The governments can basically say, hey, they're not our citizens. We're not supposed to do that for them. So the cost for the government to spend on the education, healthcare, and other social infrastructure for its own citizens, the need for that dwindles because these immigrants who have come, they won't come and to raise questions against the government for not providing them enough basic amenities as such as local citizens would. So the governments also love immigration. It helps lower their burden to spend as well as their responsibility. So all of them, the governments, the rich businesses, the rich people, they love immigration. But it's not too good for the normal people that are living there, the poor, the middle class, because their wages go down. There's added competition for them to deal with in the limited number of jobs, as well as the housing cost, the transportation cost, everything goes up. So it's basically you get paid less and you have to spend more out of your pocket, so more money for the governments and the rich. So they love it. Anyway, we'll see the report, how it goes. This report was brought out by the United Nations Population Fund. It was established in 1967. It is the sexual and reproductive health agency of the United Nations, where the mission is to deliver a world where every pregnancy is wanted, etc., etc. Basically, to have some rights for the people involved in the childbirth process, such as the mothers mostly, and to ensure countries have some sort of a stable population going forward, or at least they are working towards a target where they have sustainable populations and not just population explosion. Now, this United Nations Population Fund, it's been established by the ECOSOC. It is the Economic and Social Council. For those who don't know, the United Nations has six principal organs: the General Assembly, Security Council, Secretariat, ICJ, that's the International Court of Justice, ECOSOC, that's the Economic and Social Council, and finally the Trusteeship Council. Now, the Trusteeship Council is mostly suspended. It only meets when required. I won't get into the details of that. Now, ECOSOC is usually the forum where member countries discuss international economic and social issues, and these discussions usually lead to some recommendations for the member states to form their national laws and how to frame their national laws, basically. That's what its mandate is. So the UN Population Fund was renamed UNFPA in 1987, and it is working towards achieving three parts of the Sustainable Development Goals. That they are the Sustainable Development Goal number 3, 4, and 5 of good health and well-being, education, and gender equality. Now we all know there are 17 Sustainable Development Goals which the United Nations agreed to reach by 2030. All the member states in the United Nations agreed to achieve those targets by 2030. But looking at this report, I think it's pretty hard for them to do that. Anyways, the State of the World Population Report is the 50th year of operation of UNFPA and the 25th year since the International Conference on Population and Development, where all governments they called for a plan of action for women's reproductive health and rights to take center stage in national and global development efforts. Well, I don't know how much that has worked out, but they're having another conference in Kenya this year in the Nairobi summit that they're going to have. So the report points out that the current population in 2019 is 7.715 billion, with an average life expectancy around the globe of 72 years, and the least developed countries have recorded the highest population growth. Africa grew at 2.7% a year, while India grew at 1.2% a year between 2010 and 19. China is like under 1%. So Chinese have actually controlled their population, and the global fertility rate is 2.5, while India is 2.3. The replacement level of TFR is 2.1. What the replacement level basically means is that the number of children being born per woman are the same as the number of people dying, so the population is stable. That is what the countries aim to achieve, so that their population is not out of control and it grows at a rate which is acceptable and sustainable. So if you look at the Africa's TFR, the fertility rate in Africa, it's like 4.66. It's more like around 5 children per woman. That's too much. In Pakistan, it's like 3.1. Bangladesh 2.1. Sri Lanka 2.1. They have managed to achieve what you will say a replacement level. But the problem with Pakistan, Afghanistan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh is that their land area is too less. They're very small countries. If you look at Pakistan, it's just one fourth of the area of India. Bangladesh is 1 by 22 the area of India, and it has a very sizable population. It's as big as Pakistan. Plus, they keep crying about global warming and how sea levels are rising and they're going to get subdued. So where are these people going to go? If you look at Sri Lanka, it's like 1/50th part of India, but the population is pretty high. But the good news from these countries is that they've at least managed to bring their fertility rates at the replacement level. Now starts the crazy part. If you look at it, the fertility rates in countries like Niger is 7.15, Somalia is 6.12, Congo, Chad is almost 6, which is very much. I mean, if you look at it, these are poor countries. They don't have much resources or infrastructure, and the population is out of control. If you look at the top 10, 20 countries with the highest fertility rates, it's all African countries. Niger is 7.15, Somalia 6.1. If you look at it, go through the list, Nigeria 5.2, 5.2, for 5.4, and Nigeria has recently been declared as the country with the most number of people living in extreme poverty. They even beat India to it. So it's not a good sight going forward for these countries. If you go down the list, you'll see that even countries like Afghanistan has a fertility rate of 4.4, Iraq has 4.2, Yemen 3.8 or something. So these countries are countries where there's a lot of problems, a lot of civil wars, and a lot of, basically, they're pretty close to being defunct countries, like as Donald Trump would say, they're shitholes. And they're having a fertility rate so high, so many kids are being born in these countries, and who's going to take care of them? How are they going to live a decent life? So what opportunities do they have other than probably becoming terrorists or picking up a gun for something? The only other option that's there for them is to immigrate to one of these Western countries, which is sheer madness, because that's basically the death knell of the Western civilization. Even today, with the levels of immigration that we see all these conflict that is emerging in the Western countries, and it's only going to increase in time because people are different. People from different regions are different, and they have different cultures, different ways of expressing themselves, and it's hard to get get all these people mixed up, and it's hard to get all these people together and move forward as one, because different groups will have different interests and different ideas on how to progress forward. It'll be very hard to get all of them coalesced into one and move forward. Moving forward, the report says that the world population is expected to reach 11.2 billion by 2180, and India will overtake China as the most populous country in 2027. As the spokesperson for the United Nations earlier in the video said, that Africa would comprise for half of the population growth in this time, while Europe will see a steady decline. So they're basically calling for immigration from more populous countries into Europe, North America, Australia, and Canada to balance out these demographic imbalances. So United Nations is basically playing the role of a travel agent or an immigration agent, not even a travel agent right now. If you look at the census of India, for example, like you will find that in the year 1951, we had somewhere around 361 million people, but we're down to like 1.2 billion in 2011, and now by 2027, we are expected to overtake China. I mean, currently China is like 1.14 billion. India is 1.35 billion. That's not much. Africa is 1.28 billion. The whole of the African continent. That's a lot. Whereas United States is 327 million. I don't know how many immigrants are there that are not counted in it. Europe is 742. Russia is 143. And if you look at the population right now, you see the topmost countries: China, India, United States, Indonesia, Brazil, Pakistan. Now that's a problem. Pakistan is more or less a failed state right now. And where are these people going to go? Nigeria, Bangladesh, again. So Ethiopia, Egypt and Congo. These countries aren't really the ones where you'll have much development for or opportunities for people to actually develop properly.
Between 1950 and 2015, the regions of Europe, Northern America, and Oceania were net receivers of international migrants, while Africa, Asia, and Latin America and the Caribbean were net senders. Positive levels of net migration tend to boost the shares of the working age population and of children and youth relative to the population at older ages.
Now, immigration is something that has happened throughout the history of the world. People have traveled before, for work, for other reasons, and it is something that cannot be wished away or cannot be stopped completely. That is completely understandable, and that is not my point either in the video. My point is we have reached a stage with immigration which is very concerning because the big corporates and the governments, people in power can suddenly decide one morning that we want a particular kind of people to come into our country. That ways they'll have a population which will be less demanding of them, who will be just grateful that they're in a particular country. They'll work for longer hours, they'll be paid less. There won't be any legal requirements as such to ensure that they're paid for overtime and all those things. And a lot of governments and big corporates actually favor this kind of a mechanism. But it is very concerning because it has an direct impact on the politics, the social fabric, the cultural aspect, the demographics, how it's changing. Look at Europe, North America, most of these countries in like 10, 20 years, it'll be hard to even call them white countries anymore, to be honest. And they won't be that ways anymore.
This year, more than a third of Sydney University's students will come from overseas. Most of Australia's foreign students come from China, but in the last 3 years, there's been a massive increase in students coming from South Asia.
My name is Kshitij. I'm from India as well, Jaipur. So I'm studying Master of IT and IT Management.
In 2015, the number of student enrolments from India has more than doubled. From neighbouring Nepal, growth has jumped by a staggering 132%.
There are a lot of universities, but a friend of mine suggested me you could go for CQ.
One is the domestic student in our classes.
So they're all international?
I think most of them from India, most of students.
Lots of people from India?
Yeah.
Are you disappointed?
Yeah, little bit.
Because there is no local student domestic. So we can't communication with them and
So the report is basically focusing on the choices people have in terms of childbirth, but it's not really forthcoming on solutions other than immigration to countries. Like how do you combat this growing population? You have to combat it in one way or the other. For example, in India in 1976 we had 4 sterilizations with claims of over 4 to 5 million sterilizations. That didn't seem to make much impact because we're already going to overtake China. But 4 sterilizations, if not forced, but there are always sterilization programs around the globe in every country. They encourage people. Even in India today, they encourage sterilizations. The government funds programs where people are given economic incentives to have sterilizations, unlike some Western countries where people are given money to have children because their populations are dwindling. So that's a irony there. And if you look at it, the Indian government has also taken steps to control population. Like they started their family planning in 1952. They have a 2000 national population policy with the medium-term goal was to bring replacement levels to 2.1 by 2010, though they've not achieved it as yet. Now they plan to reach that target by 2021 because right now it's only 2.3. So that's good. Other than that, the government has taken steps to make sure that states encourage within the country, the states encourage people to have lesser number of children. There's a population stabilization fund. They're even coming out with contraceptives for women, for men, even giving them financial incentives to marry late, have less number of children. But that has somehow not just resulted in the desired results. If you look at countries with the lowest fertility rates, you see Cyprus, Italy, Spain, Portugal, Ukraine, Greece, Japan, Croatia, Luxembourg, Poland. I'm surprised Russia's not there. We even have China there. China is one country which has done very well in terms of curbing its population. I mean, they've had to take some serious drastic steps like one-child policy and putting people in jail for having more than one children and forcefully aborting children. But they have managed to control the menace of this population explosion in their lands. But if you look at this list, most of these countries are European countries. So the European countries are having a low fertility rate, while countries in Africa and other war-torn countries where the development chances are very low for people, and they're low not because of the people themselves there. I mean, they're partly to blame because they're part of that society, but it's the corrupt governments, the lack of accountability in their societies, which prohibits people to actually attain full any kind of development which is beneficial for them. It is mostly some sort of economic development that all these countries run on, where a select few are basically impacted by the growth in any way or form, and the rest are just meant to serve them. So, under that kind of a corrupt system, it's hard for people to be actually happy with their lives. So they will look to migrate. Another horrific development in these least developing countries, and even in developing countries such as India and China, that we're witnessing is a middle income trap. I think Brazil went through it a couple of years ago. What happens in a middle income trap is the rich basically migrate with all their money and their families, so we don't have the money being pumped into the economy, the country's economy. So there's less demand, less supply, overall economic growth is hurt, and lesser number of people are able to get out of poverty. So the economy is suffering because the money is taken out of the economy. And that is what is happening in India. If you look at these reports, a lot of reports have come where people who've become millionaires over the years, in the past 10, 15 years, they're basically taking their money and they're migrating to the United States or some Western country. They're taking their money and families along, and all the money they make. Most of the times, it's not even fair money. A lot of people, like you must have heard of people like Vijay Mallya, Nirav Modi, and others who basically committed fraud with the public national banks. They took money from these banks and with never the intention of returning that money. They even paid off bank officials who gave them those loans, knowing fully well that they're not good loans to give. And in the end, eventually, they've just took all that money and their families, and they're outside. Somebody's in UK, somebody's hiding in Brussels, so they're out in these countries. They put their money there, and now we have all these political dogfights. Oh, I will go and get this money back from them, and then, or somebody else is coming like, oh, I'll get this money. But everyone knows that money is not coming back. It's just political points. Everyone's trying to score over one another. If you even look at the startup culture in India, most of the startups and unicorn startups that we have in India, like Flipkart, which was recently bought by Walmart, and other startups, they're all incorporated in Singapore or some other tax heaven. It's not only bad for the host country with all this immigration coming in, but it's bad for the source country as well, because you have money leaving Indian shores or the source country that is not going to be invested in its own people, which is not going to drive the economy in that country. And it hurts people here, it hurts everyone, because not everybody can migrate. The whole of India cannot just stand up and take a plane and go to United States or Australia or Canada. You need to have mechanisms where immigration is controlled and where money is actually earned honestly and spent accordingly. So I hope this insanity of the United Nations of calling for more migration is not taken seriously by the member countries. We know Donald Trump and his administration is not too keen on letting just anybody in. Though they still favor immigration, they want skilled immigration. They don't want unskilled and illegal immigration. I hope countries around the world and the citizens and the governments actually start working towards the welfare of their own citizens rather than appearing to toe a line so that they don't appear racist or something xenophobic, or any such stigma that is attached to them for not actually allowing immigration to just continue the way it is right now. And we can control the population levels in Africa and all these war-torn countries. You need to rebuild these countries. You need people there. You need these people to actually rebuild their societies. You cannot go into their countries and try to play God and rebuild their societies. The societies have to be built from within, otherwise they will crumble. Like they've tried to rebuild Afghanistan for almost 20 years. They're unable to. Negotiating with Taliban, the same with Iraq. These things don't happen. You cannot go out from the outside and try to rebuild a society or people. That kind of an effort has to come from within. Africa, the problem of Africa has to be solved by Africans, by themselves, by creating a society that ways. The only thing the Western world can do is actually not allow the crooks from those Western African countries, from any of those African countries who are looting their own people and are indulged in malpractices, to take the money out of Africa and put it in the banks in the Western world. That's the only thing they can do. They should stop that. And I think a lot of issues, a lot of problems for a lot of countries would end with that. They need to work on those tax havens. They know where those tax havens are, whose money is where. Better sense prevails on all of us in the future, rather than us trying to fight over ideologies, what is right, what is left, who is a racist, who is a xenophobic or not. Because if you look at South Africa, for example, in South Africa there's a lot of issues with immigrants, and the South Africans, they don't really like immigrants from other African countries coming into South Africa. So here's me signing off, hoping that better sense will prevail and a permanent solution to control these populations and rebuilding these societies and countries is found, rather than some stupid conclusions drawn by these idiots at United Nations to calling for more immigration from countries who are unable to control their population explosion into countries who have actually controlled their populations. That's just insane.